Most women would have smiled through the pain, fixed the hem of the dress, and clapped politely. But not her. Not this time. It wasn't the whispering behind her back that broke her. It wasn't even the empty seat reserved for her at the edge of the reception hall, as if she were just some distant aunt. No, what broke her was the soft smile on her son's face when the bride slipped past her without a word, escorted down the aisle by her own mother wearing her dream dress, the one she had paid for. They say a mother's love knows no limits. But what happens when that love is mistaken for servitude? Elaine stood at the edge of the garden, the summer heat pressing into her skin like an accusation. The sun was golden, yes, and the roses in bloom, yes, but the beauty of the day only sharpened the blade twisting in her chest. It was her son's wedding, her only son, and somehow she had become a footnote in the story she helped build. You might be wondering, how does a mother end up here? It started small. That's how they always start. Tiny fractures beneath the surface, easy to ignore. Until one day the floor gives out. At first she thought Amanda was just particular. The kind of bride who knew what she wanted. Elaine admired that she'd raised Peter to value strength in a partner. Amanda was stylish, decisive, articulate. But beneath the polite thank yous and rehearsed smiles, there was something else, a coolness, a dismissiveness, a subtle air of competition that made Elaine feel like she had to earn her place in her own son's life. Still, Elaine tried, like most mothers do. She offered her heirloom earrings. Amanda declined. She suggested a family friend for catering. Amanda smirked. She volunteered to help with the seating chart. Amanda flat out ignored her message. But Elaine kept telling herself, it's not my day, it's theirs. That's what everyone says, isn't it? Mothers are supposed to step aside, let the bride shine, shrink just enough to be supportive, but not too present, just enough to matter, but not too much. And when Peter asked her weeks before the wedding to contribute financially, Elaine didn't hesitate. Of course she would pay for the dress. It was tradition. It was her way in. She never imagined it would become the very symbol of her erasure. You see, Amanda hadn't found the perfect dress on her own. Elaine had taken her shopping, spent 5 Saturdays combing boutiques and sipping bitter espresso in velvet chairs. She had been there when Amanda twirled in front of the mirror, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. She'd felt something stir, then hope, maybe. Belonging. Connection. When Amanda finally found the one, the lace, back the plunging neckline, the impossible elegance, Elaine had reached for her card without a second thought. Nearly $6,000. She remembered the number because Peter had been nervous about how much the wedding was costing. But Elaine told him not to worry. You only get married once, she'd said. She didn't realize he was the only one she meant it for. Because days before the wedding, Amanda called her. No pleasantries, just a short breath and a colder sentence. We've decided it would be best if you didn't sit in the front row. My mom and stepdad will be there. It's already a bit full. Elaine had blinked, the words cutting sharper than any scream. And maybe, for the ceremony, it might be easier if you just came straight to the reception. Just to avoid any confusion. We don't want it to be complicated. Complicated. That's what they always call a woman with boundaries. Elaine had sat in her kitchen that night, phone still in her hand, tea gone cold. She didn't cry, not then, because something deeper than sadness was growing inside her, something older. It was the same feeling she'd had when Peter was in middle school and started flinching at her hugs, the same ache when he stopped calling on Sundays, the same silence when he told her, "You're being too much, Mom," and she learned to shrink her joy, her love, her voice. She had always made herself small, but not today. Today, she arrived at the wedding. She wasn't on the list. The usher looked uncomfortable. Elaine smiled. She said she was just dropping something off. And then she saw Amanda radiant, shimmering, glowing in the dress Elaine had paid for, and something in her snapped clean. Do you know what it feels like to realize you were only wanted for what you could give? Elaine waited. Not long, just until Amanda was pulled aside for touch-ups, a photo with her bridesmaids. Then she moved. She walked with the kind of calm that terrifies people. Not stormy, not bitter, but quiet, measured. That specific kind of silence that comes after years of biting your tongue raw. Elaine stepped into the bridal suite where pastel satin robes hung on chairs, perfume lingered in the air, and laughter had just exited the room. The dress hung from the armoire, now a backup duplicate ordered for photo ops and after-party dancing. Amanda had changed into it between cocktail hour and the reception. Elaine's fingers trembled not from hesitation but from clarity. She didn't hesitate, not once. She unzipped the garment bag and lifted the dress from its hanger. The weight of it startled her, almost like the weight of memory. All the Saturdays, all the coffees, all the unspoken dreams of watching her son turn toward her in gratitude on this day and being completely forgotten. She didn't steal it. No, let's make that clear. She took what was hers. You can call it petty. Some would. But it wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclamation. About peeling her worth out of the silk that was never meant to belong to anyone else. About no longer being the woman who silently funded her own erasure. Elaine left as swiftly as she came, dress carefully folded in her arms like a grieving child. By the time Amanda realized it was gone, the speeches had already begun. Peter was thanking his new in-laws, thanking his best man, thanking Amanda glowing beside him in the second dress. Elaine's name was never spoken. But Amanda noticed. Her lips tightened when she noticed. And Peter noticed Amanda's reaction. Later, Elaine would imagine the conversation they must have had. Amanda sharp-edged and whispering in furious disbelief. Peter confused, embarrassed. Amanda insisting something had been taken. Peter questioning, hesitating. Amanda saying, "Your mother's gone." She took the first dress, the real dress. You see, it was never about the dress. It was about control. Amanda had learned long ago how to wield beauty like a weapon, how to craft an image, and how to keep others in orbit around her shine. The wedding was her stage. Everyone played a role. And Elaine had been cast as the forgotten woman at the back of the hall. Her presence was fine, but not too loud. Her love was appreciated, but not too close. Her money was accepted, but not her heart. You might think Elaine felt triumphant as she drove away. She didn't. She felt free. There's a difference. She stopped by the lake just outside town, the one Peter used to run around when he was 5 with scraped knees and sticky fingers. She remembered how he once gave her a dandelion and told her she was the most beautiful girl in the world. She held that dress to her chest and wept. Not for the boy he used to be, but for the woman she had tried so hard to become soft, pleasing, and visible, and how little of her remained. And as the stars began to appear and the wedding music faded into the distance, Elaine breathed in the night air and made a vow of her own. She would no longer audition for love. Let that sit with you for a second. How many times have you... Yes, you shaped yourself, smaller, dimmer, quieter, just to be invited to a table you helped build. How many times have you given parts of yourself in exchange for breadcrumbs of inclusion? How long will you let them dine on your silence? Elaine didn't go home right away. She drove to her sister's house and stayed there for the night. She didn't answer her phone. Not when Peter called, not when Amanda texted. And when her sister asked what had happened, Elaine just said, "I finally showed up for myself." The next morning, the dress was carefully folded and packed into a box. Elaine had it cleaned, pressed, and listed for resale online. It sold in 3 hours, full price. She took the money and booked herself a trip to Lisbon. She'd always wanted to go, but never found the time. Funny how time reveals itself when you stop giving it away to people who don't value it. Peter came to her a week later, quiet, awkward hands stuffed into his jacket pockets like a teenager again. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't realize what she..." But Elaine stopped him. Not with anger, with peace. "I know you didn't," she said. "And that's the part that hurts the most." He looked like he wanted to cry. She didn't offer comfort. She offered truth. "I won't fight for space in your life anymore, Peter. If you want me there, I'll be there. But I won't beg. I've done enough begging in silence." And he nodded because what else was there to do? A week passed, then another. And slowly, the air between them cooled like steam dissipating after a long boil. There were no more accusatory texts from Amanda, no sudden drop-ins or olive branches in the form of guilt-laced voicemails. Silence had returned not as punishment, but as peace. Amanda, as expected, played the role of the injured bride. To her friends, she cried betrayal. "She stole my dress," she'd whisper, painting herself in delicate pastels of victimhood, all the while ignoring the rot beneath. But the people closest to her, the ones who'd seen how she treated Elaine during planning, the way she excluded, diminished, erased, they noticed. Some didn't say it aloud, others did. "She paid for it, didn't she? She wasn't even at the ceremony, was she?" Whispers like that don't stay buried for long. The image Amanda had so carefully constructed, the perfect wedding, the perfect union, the perfect role, began to falter. Not because of what Elaine did, but because of the truth that Elaine's absence illuminated. Elaine had been the shadow that allowed Amanda's spotlight to shine, but when that shadow stepped out, the glare was too sharp, and people began to squint. You ever notice that? How the absence of someone who's always been there suddenly feels louder than their presence ever did. Peter started to feel it too. His calls became more frequent. Not every day, not overly sentimental, but real. Honest. One night he said, "I've been thinking about how you always showed up, even when I made it hard." Elaine smiled quietly into the phone but said nothing. Let the silence hold the weight of what he was really admitting. She didn't ask about Amanda. She didn't need to. What mattered was that Peter was starting to see. Not everything. Not yet. But glimmers of it. The years she spent showing up to soccer games alone. The way she made 3 versions of dinner because he was picky. The job she turned down to be home more. The way she'd say, "I'm proud of you," even when he didn't look back. And now finally he was looking back. That's the thing about family. We think we owe them unconditional loyalty, but really the only thing we owe to anyone is respect. And Elaine. She had mistaken sacrifice for love for too long. It was time she gave that love to someone else. Herself. She kept busy in the weeks after. The Lisbon trip was booked. She joined a local poetry group, started painting again, not well, but honestly. It felt like breathing, like the parts of her that had curled inward were beginning to stretch, yawn, and come alive. And then one morning she received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real paper letter, Amanda's handwriting. It was 3 pages long, apologetic in tone, polished in language, but something about it rang hollow, like someone writing what they thought forgiveness should sound like, not what they truly felt. "I understand if you felt excluded," Amanda wrote. "That wasn't my intention. Weddings are stressful. I hope we can put this behind us." Put this behind us. Elaine folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and never responded. Because sometimes silence is not the absence of words, it is the presence of dignity. You see, Amanda had never truly wanted reconciliation. She wanted resolution without accountability, a return to the status quo with Elaine back in orbit, quietly funding, quietly smiling, quietly swallowing her worth. But Elaine had rewritten the script. She was no longer available for roles that required her disappearance. Tell me, have you ever stopped performing in someone else's story? It's terrifying at first. You think you'll be forgotten. You think they'll rewrite you as the villain. And sometimes they do. But here's the truth they never want you to know. When you stop performing, you start living. Months passed. Peter came over one Sunday afternoon alone. No Amanda. Just him and a bouquet of peonies, Elaine's favorite. He didn't try to explain, didn't fumble with apologies. He just sat on her porch drinking tea, watching the wind stir the garden she had planted during those early, lonely years of motherhood. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. Elaine smiled. This time she believed it. Not because he said it, but because she no longer needed to hear it. She had found something Amanda would never be able to take, herself. Summer slipped into autumn, and Elaine, for the first time in decades, felt her own seasons shift with the world rather than in spite of it. The Lisbon trip had changed her not in a loud, Instagrammable way, but quietly, almost cellularly. She had wandered the tiled streets alone, taken 2 long breakfasts, cried at a street violinist's rendition of Clair de Lune. No one asked her for anything. No one dismissed her presence. And for once, she didn't feel like she had to prove she belonged in her own life. When she returned, her house no longer felt like a waiting room for someone else's approval. It was hers. The walls breathed with peace. She repainted the guest room, donated the box of unused wedding favors Amanda had left behind, because of course Amanda had had them shipped to her house, never once asking if that was okay. And one crisp afternoon, Elaine invited her poetry group over. They sat on her porch drinking mulled cider, reading verses about rebirth motherhood and the ache of being unseen. One of the women, Marla, leaned over and said, "You have a softness to you, Elaine, like someone who survived something." Elaine looked at her, the corners of her mouth lifting slowly. "I did," she said. And she had. She'd survived the slow death of self that happens when you believe love must be earned. She'd survived the soul starvation of polite exclusion of being useful, but never wanted. She'd survived a daughter-in-law who didn't see her as a human being, only a prop, and a son who had, however, unintentionally allowed it. But now the survival had turned into something else, a kind of power. Not loud, not flashy, but the kind that sits in your chest like a compass. You ever feel that shift from survival to sovereignty? It's subtle, but once you taste it, there's no going back. Peter continued to visit once every couple of weeks. Sometimes they'd talk about old memories, sometimes just sit in silence. He never mentioned Amanda anymore. Elaine never asked. She suspected the shine had started to wear off. Maybe he'd begun to see the cracks. Maybe he hadn't. Either way, it was no longer her burden to carry. One day he brought over a photo album, the kind with peeling corners and handwritten captions. It was full of his childhood paper crowns, mud pies, Halloween capes she'd sewn by hand. Elaine flipped through the pages, her fingers gentle, almost reverent. "She told me it was just a dress," Peter said, suddenly watching her. "That you overreacted, that it was a tantrum." Elaine looked up, her eyes clear. "Did she now?" He nodded. "But I think I knew even then. It wasn't just a dress." "No," Elaine said, voice calm. "It was never just a dress." And he understood. There was no apology after that. No grand reconciliation. Just shared breath and the weight of what had been lost. And maybe, just maybe, a path forward, not to the past, but to something honest. Sometimes the closest you'll ever get to justice is simply being understood. Later that evening, Elaine stood at her kitchen sink. The window cracked open. The wind rustled the last of the autumn leaves, and she closed her eyes. Her hands were older now, softer, but stronger too. These hands had held a baby, cooked thousands of meals, signed divorce papers, written checks for dresses she would never see walk down the aisle. These hands had let go. And that was the final freedom. You think revenge looks like fire, but sometimes it looks like letting go. Amanda would go on spinning her narrative. Elaine would not interfere. That was Amanda's world to build and collapse. Elaine had reclaimed her own. In the mirror, she no longer looked for the girl Peter once called the most beautiful. She saw someone better, the woman who stayed, who loved deeply, who sacrificed, and who finally drew the line. She didn't need front row seats. She didn't need titles. She didn't even need to be remembered. She just needed peace. And she had found it. Because in the end, it wasn't about the dress. It wasn't even about the wedding. It was about worth. And worth doesn't beg. The woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.